Welcome. I'm Erik Fleming, host of A Moment with Erik Fleming, the podcast of our time. I want to personally thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like what you're hearing, then I need you to do a few things. First, I need subscribers. I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/A Moment with Erik Fleming. Your subscription allows an independent podcaster like me the freedom to speak truth to power and to expand and improve the show. Second, leave a 5-star review for the podcast on the streaming service you listen to it. That will help the podcast tremendously. Third, go to the website, momenterik.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast, leave reviews and comments, listen to past episodes, and even learn a little bit about your host. Lastly, don't keep this a secret like it's your own personal guilty pleasure. Tell someone else about the podcast. Encourage others to listen to the podcast and share the podcast on your social media platforms because it is time to make this moment a movement. Thanks in advance for supporting the podcast of our time. I hope you enjoyed this episode as well.
The following program is hosted by the NBG Podcast Network.
Hello, and welcome to another Moment with Erik Fleming. I am your host, Erik Fleming. And I want to, in advance, wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. As this episode drops, it'll be approaching. The holiday will be approaching. And again, I just hope that everybody, gets a chance to spend time with family and friends, enjoy some good football and whatever else y'all do for your Thanksgiving traditions. And so I think this episode is relevant because I want to entitle it Home and Heart, because, there's an old saying, home is where the heart is. And my two guests come from two different perspectives of the issue. One has been an advocate for immigrants in this country, making sure that people that want to come are given the opportunities not only to come, but to live and live abundantly and to fight for their rights and, give them protections, all that stuff. And then the other guest wrote a book about her experience applying for citizenship in another country and what was her motivation and what was the experience like. And even though she doesn't live in the other country, just the journey to go through that process, I think is very important, and it makes for a good book, by the way. So I hope that y'all get that sense of home and heart when you listen to these guests, because even in the struggles that immigrants in the United States are facing, part of the reason that they're fighting is because they want America to be their home and their heart is here, even though they have connections with their native country and those will never be severed. They also have a heart and a desire to make America their home and to make the most of their opportunity. So I hope that gets captured in the interviews that you hear. Still trying to get people to make donations, and especially as this holiday season is approaching, we've got supportjamaica.gov.jm if you still want to make donations to those folks in Jamaica that were ravaged by Hurricane Melissa. And, just in the holiday season, we had this scare during the shutdown where people looked like they weren't even going to have food or weren't going to be able to afford food for the holiday season. So that just highlighted the need for support for our community food banks, support for organizations and, that raise money to deal with hunger in this country. And so I just, whatever you can do, I know that's asking a lot of people in this economic time that we're in. And it's not so much the struggle as it is the uncertainty, right? Because we're all making adjustments on the fly as the administration seems to be making decisions on the fly based on the economy. So I just want people to have a giving heart and do what you can, whatever you can. In the Christian tradition, we talk about the story of the widow's mite, right? And how that was all she had. And that caught Jesus's attention more than the folks that were giving their tithes or giving more than their tithes, right? The wealthy, so just do what you can. And I can assure you that there will be somebody that will greatly appreciate what you did. All right. So let's go ahead and get this program started. And as always, we kick it off with a moment of news with Grace G.
Thanks, Eric. The Republican-controlled U.S. Congress voted to force the release of Justice Department files on Jeffrey Epstein. A federal court blocked Texas from using its new congressional map, which was intended to favor Republicans and was drawn based on race. Indiana Republicans called off a legislative session meant to enact a new congressional map despite pressure from President Trump and his allies. A U.S. judge questioned the validity of the grand jury indictment against former FBI Director James Comey after prosecutors admitted the final indictment was never presented to the entire grand jury. Federal agents arrested at least 370 people in Charlotte, North Carolina, escalating the Trump administration's mass deportation campaign. The Pentagon is withdrawing some National Guard troops from Chicago and Portland, weeks after President Trump deployed them to those cities to combat crime. Nearly 24 people, including faith leaders, were arrested while protesting outside a federal immigration facility near Chicago. A state prosecutor in Georgia took control of the high-profile election interference case against President Trump and his allies, following a court ruling that disqualified the initial prosecutor, Fani Willis. A resolution was filed to expel Democratic U.S. Representative Sheila Sherfilis McCormick following her federal indictment for allegedly misusing COVID-19 relief funds. New restrictions on student visas and other Trump administration policies contributed to a 17% decline in the enrollment of new international students at U.S. colleges and universities this autumn. And a federal judge has ordered a dozen Texas public school districts to remove Ten Commandment displays from classrooms by December. I am Grace G., and this has been a Moment of News.
All right. Thank you, Grace, for that moment of news. And now it's time for my guest, Lorena Quiroz. Lorena's journey began in New York City. She was born to immigrant parents who valued cultural heritage and community. In Mississippi, she raises her children with values of resilience and community involvement. As executive director of the Immigrants Alliance for Justice and Equity for Mississippi, Lorena employs innovative strategies, amplifying unheard voices, and fostering recognition and respect for all. The many rich experiences and stories from her lived experience inform her resilience, innovation, and dedication required for the strong leadership in IAJE's fight for community empowerment. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest on this podcast, Lorena Quiroz. All right, Lorena Quiroz. How you doing, ma'am? You doing good?
Well, as good as can be. I'm healthy, and that's a beautiful thing.
I understand what the work that you do is jumping, and we're going to get into some of the urgent stuff that you're dealing with right now. But I want to start off the interview with the icebreaker portion. So the first thing I want you to do is respond to a quote that I'm going to read to you. It's a big piece of my heart because I'm not only an immigrant, but the daughter of an immigrant, a woman who migrated and left her entire family for years. To think that my mom sacrificed all of that so I could be talking to you, it's incredible to think that's the work they're doing for their children. What does that quote mean to you?
It's my life. It describes my life. It describes me. It describes my work. It's my organization. It's the community that I've created. Even within the organization, it's the way that I lead. It's forever present in everything that I do.
Yeah. All right. So now the next icebreaker is what we call 20 questions. So I need you to give me a number between 1 and 20.
3.
3. Okay. How should we balance rights, freedoms, and responsibilities?
I think freedom is what encompasses like all the work that we do, whether it is migration, leaving one state for another. We oftentimes, as immigrant community, we talk about, the migration that happened, from the south to the north, whether it is going from one continent to another. It is about freedom, the freedom to make decisions, to have agency over your own life, over your body. And I think freedom is, to me. And then you mentioned responsibilities, and what was the third one?
It was balancing rights, freedoms, and responsibilities.
So tied very heavily to that is our rights, the rights to choose. I think it is our responsibility, though. There's a lot of us that feel that we can be neutral. I think that a lot of people feel, and I heard it in a conversation yesterday, that I'm not political. I think our very existence is political. And so it is our responsibility to be where we can, and the degree that we can, that we are responsible to being agents and promoters of freedom, right? To have the right. I think that those of us that sit in the background don't realize that our future is tied to our neighbor's future. So although I say freedom lies heavily, as I speak to you, I'm thinking of how, yes, it is our responsibility to make sure that we all have the right to freedom.
Yeah, I got you. All right. So many Americans are experiencing the actions of ICE and the Border Patrol under the current Trump administration, including communities in Mississippi. But this is not the first time you and your fellow Mississippians faced an aggressive Trump administration immigration policy. Talk to the leaders about the raids of August the 7th, 2019.
So I was organizer and my phone just blew up. My emails, and I was sitting, I can tell you, I was on the floor of our office on Congress Street, and everyone was sharing what was happening. I think it was maybe around 9:30 in the morning. And and a lot of the family members were sharing. They took our people, they took our families, they took my mother, they took my children, and they called me because I'd been in community for so long. And at first I froze, didn't know what to do. And then, it hits you, hey, you're an organizer. You have everybody's phone number in your, if you're a good organizer, you have relational meetings, you have people's phone numbers. And we sent out a press release, and Noelle Ditla, my sister, Dorothy, this elder, civil rights elder, and myself, we put together the press release, and we had a response. Over 200 national partners, regionals, and locals showed up. And so I want to say that as a child of immigrants growing up in New York, I want to say that I have a certain level of privilege, having access to language, having access to even navigating the systems. But I also, was that child, the oldest child that was next to my mom, saw what she faced, the hardships in getting employment and how she worked 12 hours a day. And so living in Mississippi and being faced with the fact that our immigrant communities have such little resources, how we are often overlooked, and how people claim to be our voice when we have a voice, there's just no platform. It was enraging, heartbreaking, and to think that the whole state of Mississippi, although this happened in central Mississippi, in 5 cities, 6 chicken plants, the whole state felt affected by it. So whether it was North Mississippi and the family of ranchers with a child who served in Ivy League, who went to an Ivy League school, their family members was just as affected as the person whose wife was taken that day. So it was traumatic, to say the least. It was horrible. Also, the way that you got to see the cognitive dissonance, right? I got to interview because I was the organizer on the ground. I got to be connected to the entire world when it came to reporters. Korea was here, Paris was here, Telemundo, and some of the interviews were directed to business owners. And I want to say that a lot of them, they said, we love, and of course they kind of, put us all together as Mexican. We love the Mexicans, but hey, they're illegal. And I just could not understand business owners who pretty much made their money off, our immigrant communities, documented, undocumented, who could actually think like that. So I really got to see and experience, firsthand what it was like. People who did not feel that they were racist, people who felt that they loved their brother and sisters in their faith, how they could agree with the dehumanization of these humans who had lived with them, who went to school with them, who went to church with them. And it was hurtful, to say the least. I also saw something which a lot of people in one particular media outlet that came looking for the story of Black and brown separation, to say the least. But what I saw was Black churches respond immediately. Black churches that were right next door to the schools, they were the first without any ask to deliver products, to deliver. I mean, they just filled up their trucks and delivered. That wasn't covered. So I got to see that firsthand. I got to see community organizing themselves. I got to see also national response and how it can be extractive, although well-meaning. The phrase, the way to hell is paved with good intentions stands out very, very clearly. But I also, for the first time, was othered. I am an immigrant and my people are immigrants. And I remember stepping up to lead this coalition. My background is public health. I do organizing work because I organized as a young woman. But when people questioned my leadership, I saw it. I was just another brown person. I could have been picked up that same day. Who is she, right? When the immigrants' rights sector has been historically led by white folks who have no immigration experience except the desire to do good. And so simply to me, that was, I am an immigrant, so I am well fitted to lead this coalition work. So I got to see it. I got to experience it even by, my social justice colleagues, the fact that we, how we are seen, how we're perceived, and how we have to fight really hard to change those narratives that, that brown people have the capacity to lead and form coalitions and create organizations that are led by us, for us.
Yeah. And that particular raid, if I understand correctly, was the largest one in American history.
So yes, and what's interesting, recently Atlanta, Georgia got raided, and they're saying that it was the largest. So that was the first, that was the largest one site, single site raid. Ours was the largest raid in the history of this nation. Unfortunately, in Mississippi, we are known for some of those we're the worst in the list of everything that is, decent, and we are the first on everything that is bad. Unfortunately, yes, that was the largest worksite raid where 700 people were detained. About half of them three-quarters of them were kept for, an extended amount of time. Several hundred were deported, and included women, women that did have permits, residents, breastfeeding moms, and some of them were detained for over a year, even during COVID, right? Like we went right into COVID. So it was a time. It was a time. Yeah, it was the worst, the largest raid in the history of the nation right here.
Yeah. So it was just reported by the Associated Press that Homeland Security is planning to deploy about 250 federal border agents to Louisiana and Mississippi, aiming to arrest about 5,000 people in the two states starting in December. So based on your experience dealing with 2019, how will your organization fight against that?
One of the things that we've been doing is trying to prepare our community. What we know is with these large scale tactics, people are going to get apprehended and deported. With some of the executive orders where we have little to no processing, we are getting people ready. So it's important that people not only know their rights, but also be prepared. There's nothing like your agency taken away, like feeling that there's nothing you can do. So making sure that families have their affairs in order, have copies of birth certificates, have, prepare their children, because that can ease some of the hurtful trauma. Some of the things, again, that are like easy lifts are making sure that people, their cars are in order, their tags are in order. All of that is prevention and education. We do want to do a lot of bystander trainings. One thing that we are aware of, being in national and regional calls, is that these folks have been hired off the street. They're not trained to law enforcement, and some pretend to be law enforcement. So we know that the legal system sometimes doesn't work. Sometimes it takes many years. We need to catch these mistakes. We need to train anybody who has even an inkling of care, if they're passing by, to record, what's going on. We need to have a record of these mistakes, whether it's, actual mistakes by law enforcement or whether it's people pretending to be, law enforcement. So we're doing some of that, these bystanders training. There's a lot of information gathering. There's a lot of resource sharing. We are trying to create small hubs of community. It has to be led by community that's preparing warning in case they see, what's going on. We're making sure that restaurants know their rights. We're making sure, and even ourselves, like our organization, we're going to be working remotely, right? We're trying to make sure that people are aware of what's going on. We're also trying to make sure that like children are protected. And so that's another thing that we've been working with churches so that people have access to. We don't provide legal representation, but we're connecting them to our partners so that they can have access, so that they can have a number to call in case something happens. Right now is a time to unify community. It doesn't matter who, what. We just need to get together and get the folks that want to help trained, because also there can be harm, brought onto community if people are not aware of how to navigate the system, in a way that will protect them and the community that they're trying to support.
Yeah. And so you had mentioned that in 2019, a lot of Black churches responded to help out families that were impacted by the raids. And, some of the appeals that you've been working on to prepare for this one. How do you work to build coalitions with other social justice movements?
So we have 2024 was, a year where we were planning in case, it happened, what we were hoping wouldn't happen happened. And so we've been building a coalition of allies, but we're also part of other coalitions. There's also a Mississippi Rapid Response Coalition of allies throughout the entire state that, although they're not immigration inclined, they're ready with resources, they are citizens. So the privilege that a citizen has is in driving or picking up food. And so we are part of these coalitions in the state. We are also part of some other coalitions that provide some trainings. So how do these things intersect? So a climate justice coalition can find some readiness training. So we send our leaders over there, right? Like the Mississippi Rapid Response. Again, they have been able to mobilize people and accompany people to court dates and that kind of thing. Our coalition gathers all of that, and we do it through like a specific immigration lens. And so we're particularly creating committees where their education, so making sure that the school systems have the latest, know your rights. We have a legal committee, so that way, because right now we are so short on immigration attorneys, a committee helps at least answer some basic questions. Again, we make sure that our members know that we are not attorneys, but we have a group of attorneys that can say, hey, if you haven't been here for 2 years, these are the things that you need to do. This is the right paperwork, that you have to fill out. So we kind of do a triage, and then we lead them to resources, reputable resources. And so we are coalescing our folks, and we're also coalescing because the word immigrant is not clearly, it is clearly defined. Unfortunately, people do not understand the word immigrant, and it's perceived, especially with the narrative, it's perceived as anyone who is undocumented is an immigrant. People don't realize that, there's so many nuances. There's permits, there's temporary protected status, there's international students, there's residents. And so we are gathering the unusual suspects, right? And just getting them together and training them so that at least if they're moved to support, that they can. Right now, we need everybody to do even the tiniest bit in protecting our community and their own neighbors.
So is the definition of immigrant the biggest misconception or myth that you constantly fight against?
It is one of them. And this criminal narrative, not being documented is not a crime. And so that comes with that. I think that I can give you an example. Something that has been floating around in social media is this particular sheriff who is saying that he hopes, I can look at it, right? But he hopes that he gets access to something in the sheriff department, and the vitriol, the hatred, where people are like, well, how did he get a job if he's illegal? And then you see that people are saying, well, if he's a resident, he was well qualified, he applied for a job, and he can work in the United States. So having to explain people when they're looking at a picture of a uniformed sheriff, right? Having to make those distinctions in 2025, to many people is surprising, but that's how it is. In a historically binary state where people don't really, are understanding, and immigrants are moving here because of, you have cities from New York that are so expensive, so unaffordable. Even, Nashville, how it has boomed, people coming in and finding refuge in these places that are rural, having, easy access to employment. This has been blurred.
Yeah. Yeah. I get that. I think that, the other thing too that came up during the campaign, where they were going after the Haitian immigrants in Ohio.
Oh, yeah.
It's just very easy to create these, what we call boogeyman scenarios, right? Anybody that's not, as you say, in that binary, right, of black or white, it's like they're this other. And then you try to create You try to create villains out of other human beings when all they are just people seeking the same thing that we all seek. And, when we talked about freedom and opportunities to work and safe communities and all that's the reason why people come to America in the first place, because that's what we advertise, that this is a land of
Correct.
opportunity, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What does a truly just and humane immigration system look like in your ideal vision for the future?
I think that seeking asylum is not illegal. I think that people who have proof, to be members of communities by existing and creating and living a dignified life should have an opportunity to apply for a pathway to citizenship, whether it be, and I haven't even thought, I really, I think anybody that just comes in should be able to live, and that's just me, no borders, right? But if we're thinking about processes, there could be 5-year temporary status, seeing how that works. You have had no misdemeanors, you move on to applying for residency. And so this right now, unfortunately, there is no such pathway. And even asylum, people don't realize that you should have, the should be able to apply for asylum and then actually be able to have an opportunity. Right now, people who seek asylum are very unlikely to receive it. They pretty much have to have been attacked, right? And even then, the amount of what they need for you to prove is almost impossible to get. And then also, it depends on what region of the nation you're in, on the court system. Like we know there's court systems that like 99% of the time, they're going to deny you asylum. And incredible as it is, right? Like that we're thinking like it's the same laws that apply to all. So I think something that would apply to everyone would be seeking a protected status once you've been here. I don't think having people wait 10 years is fair. I think that you can see people's intentions right away. I think if people are, seeking work and been able to show you for 3-5 years that you've been able to establish income, temporary status, moving on to residency, and then, citizen, and even now obtaining citizenship, they're making it much more difficult. We know the applications are more expensive. We know like the processes are but I really think that the contributions that we make to this country are so much more than what, this narrative is trying to portray, whether it's economic, cultural contributions. When I go to the University Medical Center, so many heads of departments are immigrants, so many, neurologists. And so we are really benefiting greatly from this expertise. In a space like Mississippi, where we experience brain drain, you have immigrants that, are reminded of home because of the climate, because of, the rural nature of the state. They are reminded of home. And these young people are choosing to stay here. So there are so many reasons why we should be creating these pathways. And unfortunately, we're making it worse and worse and much harder to achieve.
So, Lorena, if you were given the power to reform something right now in immigration policy, what would be the most urgent thing that you would work on?
The due process. Immediately, the fact that they remove due process for anyone that's here for under 2 years. I mean, you actually have to have your bills, in order to qualify for due process. I mean, who has heard of that? Right? I think that immediately, like, that's like who even thinks of that? That's something that we need to ask for. But the removal of due process for our people that have not been here under 2 years, like there's really like no chance of you unless you prove that you've been here for 2 years. So I think that asylum seekers, be that as, whatever it is, the North America has caused much of the conflict including the climate change that is causing a lot of immigration up north. I mean, you have people from Central America, Guatemala, indigenous folks that cannot grow crops, that don't have access to food. And so if you're seeking asylum, I think also that would be the next thing. Like, people should be able to seek asylum in this country. So the process to seek an asylum, we should remove a lot of those barriers. I know during the raids, I spend a lot of time with the indigenous women, and you would not know from looking at them, but I can sit in a space if I gather these folks again, and I can name you 20 women in the room that were raped on their way or that have fled because they experienced sexual assault. And so the amount of suffering that our people are going through, and if we think about it, who wants to leave their homeland, right? A place like mango trees growing around the corner, like banana leaves, beaches. There's something that's drawing you to a place where you can seek better opportunities, and not necessarily for yourself or for your child. I know that my mom had to undergo so many hardships, leave her brothers and sisters and the beauty and the safety of that to come here and bring me and my sisters, you know? And so seeking asylum it's something that it's a right, and they're trying to take that away from us as well.
Yeah. All right. So my last question is, how do you cope with the emotional toll of fighting for families and individuals facing detention or deportation?
I think that is, so honestly, I was gonna say, how should I cope? But I just keep going, and that is not a good thing. I just keep going because there's always work to do. I have children of my own, and when I see like women that remind me of my mother, all I can think of is what they're sacrificing so their children and can be here. So it's hard. I recently, after the election, I saw a young woman who was one of our lead volunteers. You could call her 10 o'clock at night. If you needed someone picked up from detention, you would call her and her husband. And I hadn't seen her in 4 years. And when we saw each other, we just started to cry. I did not expect that reaction. I thought I was going to be happy to see her. And so that just made it clear that we have something that we're carrying that we haven't even addressed. But I know that if I plan to make it to see my daughters have children, that I need to do something about it. I do spend a lot of time with them, on the weekends. I try to do that. But it's so hard if there's an emergency, for you to like just completely disconnect. And then community, like you find that in community, and I think you have to share what you're feeling. So finding a safe place, a safe people to share, I think is how I've made it this far.
Yeah. Well, Lorena Quiroz, I commend you for doing what you're doing. I did some immigration legal work when I was in Mississippi. A lot of activism, whether I was elected or working directly with an organization or an ally organization. So I know it's not easy work. In the Black community, we say we're doing the Lord's work. And so I greatly appreciate you. And I pray that you continue to have the strength, not only to be a devoted mom, but to be a devoted worker in this. And I know it's going to be crazy over the next few weeks, but I hope that you can navigate through that and protect the people that you need to protect. If people want to support IAJE or reach out to you, how can they do that?
Yes. So we're on socials. So Facebook, Instagram, we are, I don't know, we're not that, that on X, we don't participate as much. but also our email info@iaje.us. So that would be the general organizational. My personal email is my name, Lorena @iaje.us. We also have a number if someone wants to reach us, and I can share that it is 1-888-970-4253. We are doing a lot of fundraising at this moment. Our work exists through grants. Grants are usually attached to outcomes, so the fundraising goes directly to community. So on our social media, you can find a way to donate via ActBlue and other applications. But yes, that's how you can reach us, reach our work. And, for the next couple of months, we're going to be working remotely to make sure that our entire staff is safe. So we won't be at the offices. So that would be the best way to reach us.
Well, Lorena, thank you for taking the time out. Like I said, I know this is a very, very hectic moment right now, and I appreciate you carving out the time to come on the podcast and talk to the listeners about what you're dealing with in Mississippi and really what immigrants and activists are dealing with throughout the country.
Thank you so much for having me and for and for making space today.
All right, guys, and we're going to catch y'all on the other side. All right, and we are back. And so it's time for my next guest, Ann Hand. Ann Hand was born in 1985 in New York and currently divides her time between Massachusetts and Mexico City. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree from McGill University and a Master of Education degree from Harvard University. She has spent her career blending research, policy, and practice to create social impact in the Americas and beyond. A recognized expert in global education and development, she is frequently published on topics related to technology and society. Austrian, again, is her first book, and that's what we're going to talk about on this podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest on this podcast, Ann Hand. All right. Ann Hand. How you doing, sister? You doing good?
I'm doing awesome. It's Friday. Week's almost over. Thanksgiving's coming up. I'm just really happy to be here with you, Eric. I'm doing great.
Well, yeah, Thanksgiving is always that time of year. And when this airs, we'll be right there at the doorstep of it. So I hope that you and yours have a wonderful Thanksgiving. I'm going to do my best I tell people, when they ask me the question to watch my figure, I say, I see it every day. So, and thank you. That's one of those holidays where it's like, all that's out the window anyway. So what I want to do is normally when I do these interviews, I start off with an icebreaker period of the show. And so the first icebreaker is a quote that I want you to respond to. Mm-hmm. And the quote is, home isn't just a place. It is the heart of your story. What does that quote mean to you?
I mean, home can mean so many things. And I think home is a feeling more than anything else, for me at least. Like for some people, home is that place, right, where you grew up with and your grandparents are there and it smells a certain way and it looks a certain way. And at the seasons, things change or, the sounds change or whatever gives you that feeling of like, yeah, this is where I'm supposed to be. And this is where I feel comfortable. And this is where I feel accepted. And this is where I feel loved. And for many people, home is really that physical place exclusively. And there are certainly for me places that feel like that. I think of my grandparents' apartment in Brooklyn, which they passed away years ago and the apartment's been broken up. But like that memory of home, that's something that I always take with me. But at the same time, I really do feel like, we make our home in a lot of different ways. For many people, you choose your family, you choose kind of where you spend time and where you really feel that same feeling, right? Where you're loved and where you're accepted and where you can grow. And that can mean a lot of different things to different people, and everybody has their own version of what that is and what that looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very true. All right. So now the next icebreaker is what we call 20 questions.
Okay. That's a lot of questions, not just one icebreaker question.
Well, the thing is, I just need you to give me a number between 1 and 20, and then that'll be your question.
5.
Okay. What do you think we should decide at the local or state levels as opposed to the federal level?
That is a question. Oh my goodness. I was not expecting that question. You know, I don't know. It depends on context, I think. And a lot of the time, you know, local people do know, you know, what's best for them and what's best for their communities. But I really think that there should be really clear guardrails and really clear kind of guidance from higher up to kind of figure out, you know, what fits within that. Like, what are the kind of standards, or what are the ways that we see some of these things as really needing to be kind of knit together so that there's commonalities between communities. You know, some small countries, they do everything at the federal level, right? Because you're talking about something that's like the level of a state, you know? You're talking about a country that has maybe like 5 million people, which is like smaller than a lot of cities in the US. And so for them, it's sort of like the two are a little more intermeshed. But I think in the US, you know, when we're such a big country and it's so diverse, there needs to be, I think, like a lot more local ownership, but at the same time, these kind of broader federal just limits on what that can look like. And I think that there are things that, you know, people go and you know, get master's degrees and doctorates, you know, for a reason. And some of that really is to sort of say, you know, this is really best practice. This works well. Here are ways that we know that we can support our communities best. And so that can also kind of shortcut like local communities needing to do all that research for themselves and you know, kind of get to the same conclusions. So I sort of feel like as long as those bigger pieces are in place, then and you know, there's a lot about equal opportunity and, you know, just the ways in which some of these things kind of happen in practice. You know, there are real, you know, guardrails and orientation for what that needs to look like. So people, you know, people get they have the opportunities that they deserve. You know, that once that's kind of in place, then yeah, like let local and state decide about kind of what happens with the rest of it.
Yeah. So kind of like collaboration with sensitivity.
That's a great way to say it. Yeah. Yeah. You've heard this question before. I haven't heard this kind of question for a long time. So you kind of like, that's a big question, right? That's like what governments, like that's what the debate always is, right? Like, and I think you know, it's interesting because I've worked a lot internationally, and over the years, I've really come to appreciate how much the US really is decentralized, because you see other countries that have like federal systems, but they still have, you know, like a national education curriculum or something like that. And then so local, you know, state and, you know, county authorities, they have a lot less say in those pieces. And in the US, we sort of have it the other way where most of the time, you know, the local authorities really do have most of the say. And then the sort of federal higher levels are oftentimes even less about the details. They're just about, you know, just really like financing or things like that. So yeah, I can appreciate kind of both sides of the coin. And I think that the real answer kind of depends on the type of country and the type of place that you want to build.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I remember going to Mexico. I'm not as world traveled as you or a lot of other people, but I did go to Mexico, and I remember it was kind of unique because I was a state legislator at the time, and I spoke to some state legislators in Mexico. But in Mexico, the state legislators are the equivalent of the House of Representatives to us. And then they have federal senators. But, you know, it's like I can't even imagine all of us in state legislators all traipsing up to Washington, D.C. to vote on something. That's really crazy, but it works for them. And what we do allegedly works for us. So,
it's a work in progress, right? Like it's a work in progress.
250 years. It always has been. So let's talk about this book, Austrian Again. Now, it's only 2 words, but that would catch, if I was looking for, some nonfiction to read, that would catch my attention. Of all the countries in the world, I want to be Austrian again. I'd be like, all right.
What does that even mean, right? Like,
yeah. So what does that mean? What does the title of the book mean to you?
Yeah. So Austria, just, to get everybody on the same page, it's one of these really tiny countries. It has like 9 million people in the middle of Europe, in the middle of the mountains, no coast, no nothing. It's all mountains. And for me, so my family, part of my family immigrated to the U.S. from Austria. My grandfather came when he was a teenager, sort of between World War I and World War II. And he and his siblings and his mother eventually, when, she was able to come over, they were like, we're done, and part of that was out of necessity because just for economic reasons. And then because of World War II and the Holocaust, they were just like, no, we're done. There's nothing for us to go back to. So they, turned their backs and they said, we're American. And that's, I think, one of the great things that the U.S. can do, because there was no opportunity for them in Europe at the time. And if they had stayed, they probably would have been killed. And that part of it is very, very clear to me after, what I did, for the book and doing this family research and stuff like that. But about 5 years ago, Austria opened up this citizenship policy, this reparation citizenship policy, restoration citizenship. There's lots of, I guess, different words that you can use to basically say, for the descendants of people who were part of these persecuted groups in the lead up to and then during World War II and the Holocaust, we're willing to offer the descendants citizenship. And for me, it was really interesting because I guess I never thought something like that would be available. And I remember like just reading the news online one day and kind of seeing the headline and being like, wait, like what? Like, cause you read the news, especially like national, international news, and you never think that anything is going to like be directly applicable to you. You just read it because, you want to know what's going on in the world and all that. And so, the book is about my process, my family process, kind of understanding a bit more about these roots and where we came from. And then, making the decision for some of us to see that the door was open and say, okay, yeah, like I want to walk through that door and I want to see how it goes. So Austrian again, it's simple, but it sort of uncovers this story where you scratch the surface and you start to get into some of these thornier issues about identity, about belonging, about, where is it that like I really fit in the world and what does that mean to me and who I am and how I see myself.
So your family actually has some Czechoslovakian roots. So I guess my question is, why not Czech again? Why Austria? why do we stop at Austria?
Well, first it sounds better, right? No, but it's because the Czech Republic, where my grandfather was born, they don't offer this kind of pathway. They don't have this kind of, look back into the past to be able to say like, oh, we want to, we want to make amends for what we did. And it's interesting because, all of this 150 years ago, even 100, what year are we? 2025? So 110 years ago, all of this was still the same country. It was all part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It had been one country for like hundreds of years at that point. And then after World War I and after they lost, it was all split up into what's now parts of like 7 or 8 different countries. So, when we start to go into all these different countries and all that, it's like, yeah, they were different. But at the same time, my family had family everywhere in all these countries, in what's now Slovakia and what's now the Czech Republic. And, they my immediate, ascendants ended up in Vienna, which is the capital of Austria, which was the capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And they went there for economic opportunity. Like, why does anybody, migrate within a country when, they've been settled in one part of it for a long time? Like, they usually do it for economic opportunity. And it was the same thing, right? It's the same story as what's happened in the US for also, a very long time. And to me, it's interesting, right? Because each of these countries has its own way of like thinking about the past and dealing with the past, or not dealing with the past, or thinking about who belongs and all of that. And so, so in this case, I feel like Austria's kind of done a lot more soul searching. They have this door that's open, and the other countries, where my family came from, they just don't have this kind of, yeah, they haven't done anything like this.
Yeah, because you used the word reparations dealing with Austria, and then just kind of talking to you before. Do you feel that, and this is an aside from the book, do you feel that the United States needs to have a soul searching moment, a discussion? Do you think that we're doing that? Because, that's an important issue in the African American community about reparations. What would you think a United States reparations process would look like? What would if you were asked, hey, well, Austria's got this thing, what would you suggest to people that want to deal with that here in the United States?
So I think, in the US, this kind of comes in fits and spurts, right? Like when was it, like 10 years ago when the whole case for reparations thing was like a really hot topic and all that. When you started to see like a few sort of smaller like counties or towns and cities, like think about what monetary reparations could look like, right? For property that was confiscated over the years, for all the forced labor, all these like different pieces of the same kind of puzzle of persecution and oppression that unfortunately happens in lots of places in the world, right? Like no country has a monopoly on any of this stuff. And it really pains me to say that. And I think it's rare in a way that you kind of see what happened in the US, which is the first. So like from what I know about Austria and the US, it's sort of flipped. So what happened in Austria after World War II, after all this property was confiscated and, basically people, they fled, they were deported, they were sent to death camps, they were sent to concentration camps, all that stuff. After the war, Austria gave financial reparations, monetary reparations for property that was confiscated. And it's related to the book because we found out that my great-grandmothers, my family imported liquor and spirits from like different parts of what was then the Austro-Hungarian Empire and then all the different countries. So that was confiscated. That was what they called what they called Aryanized. The property was given basically to a Nazi party member, and they were like, just get out of here if you can, and if not, like, well, we'll see. But they were lucky; they were able to get out of there. And then about 20 years after that happened, after the war was over, after everything was signed, my great-grandmother did get money for what was taken. But at that point, it was like you're out of there, you're out of society, you're building your life somewhere else, and there's no place for you back here. And that part of it was very, very clear. And so in the US, you kind of have that flipped, right? Where you have the citizenship piece as like really enshrined in the Constitution. And you're really saying, okay, like, you belong here. But the monetary piece and the real sort of recognition of property and labor and all of that, that's not recognized in the same way. And so I think, I don't know what I would advise people to do, but I think just understanding like what that means and what that looks like in different contexts can be really, really different. And in the end, I think it needs to be meaningful. Like, I don't know, I was reading something about one of the cities that was doing reparations. I think it was in Illinois, and they were interviewing people who got reparations, like financial reparations. And they were like, it's nice, but it's not like a life-changing amount of money. And so like within all of that, like, I think that it has to mean something to the people who are receiving whatever this looks like. And so in my case with interacting with people in Austria and, the Austrian embassy in the US, everybody is incredibly kind. Everybody will go out of their way to sort of recognize this historical injustice. Everybody will really be kind and treat me well, which, you deal with any bureaucracy. You're not necessarily expecting, people to be kind in the process. And I think that can go a really long way. Like it's not necessarily about like one concrete thing or another. I think it's about that sense of belonging and acceptance and feeling like you could contribute and you could participate and that would be valued. I think that that's the most important piece.
Yeah, I think you touched on something very, very important. I know you feel as though, well, maybe I'm not the best person to say something, but the word kind is the key. I think when we do stuff in America, it should be out of the kindness of our heart rather than feeling that we're obligated to do it. And I think that's where we need to get to, whether it's dealing with reparations or healthcare or any other issue. I think that there has to be a genuine kindness, a genuine joy inflected on it. But don't let me get into that sermon. Let's get back to you.
Preach.
Let's talk about, speaking about kindness, let's talk about your grandfather. Obviously, he had a major influence in you reconnecting. I mean, I know you were going through the news, like you said, during COVID, and it's like, oh, this would be intriguing, but it wouldn't be intriguing if you didn't have that relationship or didn't have that understanding about your grandfather. So talk about him and what did he teach you and what did he instill in you that allowed you to make this decision, make this journey?
Yeah, so he immigrated when he was 18. He left Vienna, he left Austria as soon as he possibly could. His family was working class. His father had passed away a couple of years before, and it was kind of like, there's nothing here for me. They didn't have the connections. The country was in kind of an economic mess, and he applied for the visas that he could, and he left. And it took a while to get to the US because at that point, that kind of 5-year period when they just said, okay, doors are open for anybody who wants to come over for Europe. Like those doors had been closed. And so it took a while for his paperwork to come through. But he got to the US when he was about 20 and he lived his whole life in the US. He was in the army during World War II. After World War II, he was trained as a cabinet maker with like really, really old school, like we're talking like techniques from like the 1700s and stuff like that, like really, really old school stuff. But what he did afterwards was he worked in like furniture making and factories, and he ran these new factories that they were trying to get off the ground, Massachusetts, to ship stuff to New York and to other parts of the country. Yeah, things like that. And he was just one of those people who kept trying, right? Like he kept, even if things didn't work out, he said, like, okay, I have to, take my time and sort of work through what happened and that I wish it could have been different. But, like he didn't let that get in the way of what he actually wanted to do and the care that he had for his friends and his family and kind of the joy that he also put out into the world and the kind of life that he wanted to live. And after he retired, a lot of the creativity that he didn't have a place for, in furniture making came out through sculpture. And so he had this sort of second career in retirement as a sculptor and he won some local awards. And I think that brought him, a different type of, recognition and joy. And to me, it just shows you that you can always do something else. You can always do something different. You don't have to, things don't work out sometimes, and you can always find a way to really sort of wrap your head around it and then say, okay, like, but that doesn't define who I am. That doesn't determine who I am. And I think that a lot of that, that spirit, like it must have come out of the way that he grew up. And there's a lot of sort of Austrian culture, Viennese culture, which has spread out into the world, like in a lot of ways that we don't necessarily like explicitly recognize. It's just part of pop culture now. But I grew up with some of the food that he grew up with that he would make. I mean, whipped cream everywhere because Austrian pastries have whipped cream all over the place. And music and, being sociable and, knowing that the world sort of goes beyond your apartment door. And I, we had a lot of conversations, me and my mom, especially about kind of what he would have thought about the process, because for him that door was closed. But just because for him that door was closed, it doesn't mean that he wouldn't have been curious for it to be open for people further down the line. So, taking the world as it is, but also, kind of wanting it to be a little bit different and pushing for it to be different and kind of doing what you can, right? Like within your little space in the world.
Yeah. So that kind of leads me to this question about the influence of history. How much do you think that history influences our day-to-day life? And do you feel that your book highlighted that?
That's a great question. So I think that history influences our lives in ways because the world that we're in is totally shaped by history, whether or not we're explicitly aware of it. And something that was really interesting the other day, I was talking to somebody who read the book, who's not Jewish, who was like, it really made me think about how recent all of this stuff was. Like, this was all like grandparent level, right? Like, it's not, and I'm 40 now. So, we're also talking about sort of a period where at this point, the grandparents are all passing away. And so I think that the question becomes, how do you take the lessons and kind of reflect them back in a way that makes sense for our lives? And I am sad sometimes that it feels like a lot of history is relegated to a book, because that's so not the world that we live in. I mean, even if you see a memorial for something that happened, in the 70s or 80s, and we're like, oh, that was a while ago. It's like, no, that wasn't. It really wasn't that long ago. I don't know. Maybe it's things looking very black and white, or things actually just being in the history books, but so many of the ways in which, the Holocaust or the civil rights movement, these things are very, very recent. And when we put them sort of in the history book and then sort of, lock that box in a way, and can say, okay, like now it's history, it's not taking people and sort of meeting them where they are and treating them sort of like they're intelligent people. And you can say, hey, this is what happened, 50 years ago. What do you think's changed? Has anything changed? Here's what happened 70 years ago, and in the case of Austria, with this process of, I think, coming to terms with their past and their role, their very active role in World War II and sort of within the Nazi regime once Austria was annexed by Germany. That took a very long time. That took a couple generations for people to really be like, oh yeah, like those stories that we're telling ourselves are not the true stories of what happened. And it's that kind of reflection about history and about our roles in it, even when they're difficult, that's so important, I think, today more than ever. And I wish that more people would be really thoughtful and have these conversations, because they're so important to have, regardless of kind of what piece of the puzzle or piece of the pie you're looking at in these spaces.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you did a good job on that. I just, it's just, the author, to ask the author, did you achieve what you wanted to achieve? That kind of thing is always interesting to hear people's critique, right?
Well, within this too, I mean, that's a good question. There's no community, right, for people who are doing this kind of thing. And there's some Facebook groups out there and, but there's no like real way to ground the conversation about, what is this, restoration, reparation, citizenship thing? Like, what does it actually mean to people who are doing it? And I've had a bunch of in-person events. At this point, we had almost 200 people come to the Austrian embassy in DC just for a book talk when, at the beginning when I was planning it with them, they were like, yeah, we usually get like 25 people at book talks. And I was like, great, we'll have an event at the embassy. It'll be fun. But they were blown away. And I think it speaks to the fact that like people are smart and engaged, and they want to find a way to talk about the things that they care about, and they want to find a way to create community around that. And I hope that this is a way for people to do some of that. I mean, it's not going to be everything, but at least it's something to ground the conversation, whether or not you agree with what's in the book or not.
All right. So I got a couple more questions for you. So, a lot of people during the first administration, Trump administration, and now in the current one, first thing a lot of people were saying was like, oh, I got to get out of here. I got to leave. I got to go. And I've actually had a guest come on a couple of times who does that kind of work where she helps people repatriate, in other countries. Having gone through that experience, do you feel that it is a good thing for people to do? Or, well, let me phrase it this way. Is it a thing that people should do out of fear, or is it something that people should do, with a clear conscience and a clear desire?
That's a great question too, Eric. You're asking me all the good questions. It depends. It's difficult. So, I'm not planning on picking up stakes and going to Austria. Like that was never my plan. That was never the intention. There are some people who, they have some things that, whatever it is in their world where they say this is a non-negotiable and I want to live in a certain way. These are my values. I feel like they're not respected here. That's a different kind of situation. I think that with a lot of this, like fear is never the answer. Fear is never a way to kind of move through the world with confidence and grace. And I think that oftentimes people kind of panic or they think that things are going to potentially, go off the deep end. Sometimes I get these questions that are like, oh, well, how did your family know that the Holocaust was coming, and how did they know that they should leave? And they didn't. Like, that's the thing. Like, they really, really didn't. And, there was no like crazy like fear or anything like that. But they were in the kind of circumstance where things just, they kept getting worse and worse, and things just weren't working for them, where they had called home for 30 years at that point. So they left. And I think that, that happens to a lot of people for different reasons. Usually, I would say mostly economic, the political, like my family's case is a little weird where, when you read about, what happened in World War II and people, the Nazis coming into Vienna and like going into these apartments and taking all this art and like, all this stuff. You don't really see cases like my family's case that was working class. My grandfather and his two older siblings left before for economic reasons, just because they really had no opportunities there after World War I. And we qualified for this pathway because my great grandmother had stayed. That's the only reason. And so we found family letters that we didn't know about. The family in the US had been trying to get them to leave for a long time because basically they were like, we're here now, we're established, we can make it work, you should come. And they didn't want to. They really, really didn't want to. Their lives were there. And my great grandmother at that point, by the time she left, she was in her 60s. I mean, what 60 something wants to pick up and go to another country where they don't speak the language that you've spoken your whole life? Or I think she spoke 3 languages fluently, so they don't speak any of those languages, and really have to start over again at that point. Like, that's not something that I think anybody would really willingly want to do, but it wasn't based on fear. It was based on kind of more of I would say a pragmatism more than anything else. I don't I don't know, for all these people who talk about it, who say like, oh, we got to go to Canada. We got to, we're going to get one of those investor visas to New Zealand if you have money to do that or all that. It's really hard to uproot your life, especially, when you're older, when you're more established, when you have your roots in a place for so long. And so it's really hard. And I think it's important to understand like really how difficult it is. It's not just the language. It's really saying like, okay, no, I have to sort of make that mental adjustment and say, this piece of my life that I thought was very solid for so long, it's not like that anymore. And I don't know how many people are actually doing it. How much of it is just talk, how much of it is really like, people making plans. Like I have no idea, but I think like my bottom line is that a lot of this is a lot more difficult maybe than people think that it is. And, so it's also kind of like, well, what really is the push and pull and how much can you, stay rooted and, fight for what you believe in? Because in my family's case, if they had stayed, they would have been killed. And that part of it is very clear in retrospect. But at the time, nobody knew that. So there's all this like history didn't have to happen. Going back to the history question, right? History didn't have to happen the way that it turned out. Nobody expected it to happen the way that it turned out, at least when they were living through it. And I think a lot of, my own family's story in many ways, it was about a lot of luck one way or the other. And it's important to recognize that too. Like luck plays such a big role in how things work out, especially when these kinds of situations like really start to get hairy.
Yeah. All right. So my final question is, you said in the book that you grew up with a mindset that America is always about moving forward. Now that do you feel that your child is going to have that same experience about America, or is there something that you're seeing now that's like, I don't know. It's like, cause you stated that, now your child has options because you have, the dual citizenships and all that, but the moving forward was very intriguing because it was just like, that's just being what American is about. So do you still kind of feel that way? And like I said, do you think that America that your child is going to grow up in will be in that same mindset?
I have to think about this one because a lot of it's going to depend on him, right? And his personality and how much he pushes, right? The moving forward thing, I think, can be really hard too. I mean, when the US is just go, 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 because that's just the way it is. I think it can be really exhausting for a lot of people. And I think we're seeing that more and more where everybody, like people, they work their butts off and they try their best. And the story that you hear about that being enough, like maybe that was never actually the case. Maybe it's always been kind of like the situation where people work their butts off and some people do well and other people just they don't feel like they're moving forward in that way. But you don't really hear about that as much just because of the way the US is and this like push around go, go, go and build and do and move and all of that. So he, his personality, like he's got a ton of energy. He's he's gonna be two pretty soon, and he's in that like toddler phase of just like you take him out of the stroller and he's like running around the room and like grabbing pillows and like doing all those things. So I hope he has the energy to go 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 and make the world more of a place that's aligned with the values that we want to give to him, this idea that, the world can be as big as you want it to be. I think that's also a very American thing where it's, it's not scary to, go and take these opportunities. I mean, one of the Austrians was saying to me that she really admires that, like, for the kids who can, who are able to, they go away for college. You're 18, you're gone. You're not, staying at your parents' house until you're in your 40s. At least that's the ethos that people take with them. And it's complicated because so much of this is about personality. It's about circumstances that are kind of beyond your individual control. It's about, what interests you, what intrigues you. Do you want to stay close? Do you want to go out and see what else is out there? Does the world let you do that? And so I hope in his case, the world lets him do that. And I hope the world lets him go as far as he can go. And I hope that we set him up to be able to, to put out good and make the world, a better place than the one he was born into.
Well, Anne Hand, I have no doubt. You talk about it's been 20 years since I've had to deal with that. But I still remember. Oh my God, do I still remember it? So enjoy that moment. But Anne, I've enjoyed having you come on. If people want to get the book, how can they get that? If people want to reach out to you, how can they do that?
Yeah, so the book's on the online places. It's on Amazon. It's on Bookshop. If you want to support your local bookshop, I'll order it there. It'll get shipped to, an independent bookstore close to you. It's on Barnes & Noble, so it's on those websites. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter X. I'm on LinkedIn. So any of those, I'm super easy to find. It's just different, versions of my name, like with an underscore on one or with a dot on the other one, whatever the platform kind of makes you do. But I'm super easy to find, and I'm always happy to just chat with people who are interested in having these conversations. So really, don't be a stranger.
All right. Well, and again, thank you for doing this. So, when you decide to write your next book, understand that the rule is that you have an open invitation to come back on the show. So,
oh gosh, thanks, Erik. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So when you decide to do that, just let me know. We'll make that happen. But again, I just want to thank you for doing this interview.
Yeah, thank you, Erik. Thanks to everybody listening. It's just been such a pleasure chatting, and I hope the themes of the book, really resonate with people in different ways, and just get people thinking about things a little bit differently.
All right, guys, and we're going to catch y'all on the other side. All right, and we are back. So I want to thank Lorena Quiroz and Anne Hand for coming on the podcast. Those two women, they're from different perspectives, doing different kind of work, but I hope you understood the context about home and heart from those two interviews. Lorena, of course, it was really, really good to be able to talk to her prior to what's getting ready to happen down in Mississippi. And I wanted to bring some context because she was there on the ground when the big raid happened in 2019. And it really kind of got her really started in the community organizing. I mean, she had been doing some work, but to get to this place now with her organization, IAJE, to be ready for this raid that's coming the next few days. So the fact that she was able to set aside some time to talk about that and to do this podcast interview, I am very, very grateful to her for doing that. And I meant what I said, that, she's doing the Lord's work, and hope that she continues to have a hedge of protection around her to keep doing that. With Anne, a personal book that she wrote has an incredible amount of impact on a lot of people because, all of us want to reconnect with our history. I'm a big proponent of history. I believe that you have to understand history in order to understand what's going on now. And the way that she was able to tie in a lot of things that we're dealing with, just from her personal journey of reconnecting with our Austrian roots. And just to kind of, if you read the book, you'll understand just kind of her experience having to apply for citizenship in another country and all that, and then counteract that with what people that Lorena, who the people that Lorena are fighting for, all they want is the same ability and access, the same opportunity to live where they want to live, to be citizens or just, be able to travel, be able to work, whatever they want to do, go to school. Nobody wants anarchy when it comes to policies, whether it's immigration or others. But at some point in time, we have to be humane, and we have to use our humanity, use our joy, use our kindness to start putting together policies rather than political expediency or cruelty, right? Because, that's where we are now. We are in a very, very, and people can make the argument that America as a society has been cruel for a while. And as somebody that is speaking about history, who is, a descendant of Black people, we can cite all of the different things that have happened, even in my lifetime, to show how America can be cruel to its fellow citizens or fellow residents. And so I just think that if we start really defining true American leadership, it's more than just the progressiveness or the innovation. There has to be some heart behind it. There has to be some kindness, because you can change things and be evil, because that's exactly what we're dealing with now. We're dealing with a political climate that rewards vindication, that rewards cruelty, that rewards pettiness. And it really shouldn't be like that. Politics, and I guess you can judge me for being biased, but I think politics needs to be more egalitarian, right? I think politics needs to be at a different level, where the people that have been given or entrusted positions of leadership should be more benevolent, should be more considerate, should be doing things that'll benefit all instead of trying to figure out who they can eliminate so that a few can reap the rewards, right? Just think that's where we need to be. So home and heart fits, because this is my home. I have had a privilege to travel to a couple of countries. I've had the privilege to travel across the nation. And there's no other country I would rather live in than the United States. So this is where my heart is. But just because my heart is in this place and this is my home doesn't mean that I am satisfied with everything that happens. And one of the unique things about this nation is that the experiment was set up so that when it got to a point where it was intolerable, when it got to a point where it resembled a tyranny, that we had the vehicles and the wherewithal and even the tradition to fight against that. And that's what we're doing now. For a president to say to congressmen and women who actually served in the military, to call them traitors for reminding men and women who are currently serving in the military that you don't have to follow an unlawful order, speaks volumes about where we are. The fact that those men and women who served, who are now in another level of service through their elected positions, felt that they even needed to say that, should make people uncomfortable. You can be angry, but you need to be angry at why those folks felt they needed to say that rather than be angry at the messengers, right? And then to say, well, they're being seditious and they're traitors and all that stuff. It's like you have no concept. You have no self-reflection. when people that supported you were willing to vandalize the Capitol building and do harm to members of Congress, and all you can say is that you love them, see, that's where sedition comes in. January 6th was an act of sedition, not a commercial reminding people of their military obligation, right? That's where the confusion is. It is not patriotic to kill your political opponent. It's not patriotic to threaten your political opponent with violence. It's not patriotic to actively seek to vandalize the people's house. And it's not patriotic to tell military personnel to go after fellow citizens. That's not what they signed up to do. That's not what they are designed to do, right? The fact that you as a president felt that you even had the temerity to ask a general, is it all right if we shoot a protester in the leg, tells me that you don't have a true grasp or concept of what your position is or what America is really all about. If you don't believe me, ask Bull Connor. If you don't believe me, ask Goon Jones, right? Those are people that didn't grasp the concept either. And history did not look at them kindly in the aftermath. So, you can support in politics who you want to support based on ideas and concepts and solutions toward our nation's problems and issues. But I question supporting anyone who doesn't understand what America is about, whose vision of the world they live in is encased in a mirror that they acknowledge exists, but don't really look at the real reflection. I just think that we can do better. We have had our political disagreements, but you cross the line when your disagreements stifles my right to disagree. And it puts the institution that we know as America in jeopardy. That's a fundamental problem to me. You want to base your economic policy on tariffs? That's fine. We had people do that. And we saw the result of that. There was a major depression. They called it the Great Depression because the country never recovered, right? Not right away. And so that's an economic argument. That's a policy argument, right? But, the smallness, the pettiness, the desire for revenge is not what we're about. We seek justice, but justice is not revenge. If you commit a crime and you have gone through the process and the process was fair and you are found guilty, then you got to deal with the consequences, right? Regardless of whether you relate to the perpetrator of the crime or not, right? We've got to fix a lot of things. And we've got to fix a lot of things because we're humans. We're not perfect. The goal is to seek a more perfect union. America is an ideal that we have to live up to every day. But there has to be an effort. And when I see people in this current political environment, they're not giving any effort. They're doing the bare minimum if you give them credit for that. We shouldn't be worried if our children are going to have better lives than we have. We shouldn't be making decisions whether I'm going to go to the doctor or whether I'm going to pay my rent or eat. We shouldn't be worried if our children not only have a safe environment to live in, but that they have access to the best education possible to achieve the enlightenment that human beings are supposed to achieve. it's good to make money. It's good to make enough to afford the lifestyle you want to live, take care of the things you need to take care of. I don't think we need to have a trillionaire. I don't think you need to have that much money. And I'm not trying to begrudge people that, for whatever reason, are fortunate enough to do that. But I just think that America is bigger and better than that. I think that if we're going to have a trillionaire in the United States, then no child should be hungry. No military veteran or really anybody should be homeless, right? If we're going to have a trillionaire. I think that if we're going to be the wealthiest nation in the world, then we need to show that. And we need to stop spreading the gap between haves and have-nots. If it was up to me, there wouldn't be such thing as a have-not. Everybody would have. So, I just implore us to continue to do better, especially in the choices that we make. I see that there are some people that may be coming around and understanding that the extremism is not the point. It's the exceptionalism that is. And so we'll continue to watch that journey as those people evolve politically. But I think we as citizens need to demand better of our people. We're trusting them to govern. If we're trusting them to lead, then they should do better. I mean, it sounds obvious, but it's apparent that a lot of people haven't gotten the memo. All right, guys, that's all I got. Thank y'all for listening. Have a happy Thanksgiving. However you celebrate it, the important thing is family and love and human connection. And so I just hope that everybody, as we enter this holiday season, if you know some people that are, they call it the holiday blues, but, if you know some people that are struggling, reach out to them. If you know some people that need some help, help them. And just remember what America is about, because there are people who are fighting every day to get here and to stay here because of the opportunity and the hope that we advertise. Again, thank y'all for listening. Until next time.
NBG Podcast Network.